Mr. Stafford Smith.
Mr. Chairman, is that working? Okay. Look, first let me say thank you very much for the invitation to this hearing, and also as an American, albeit one with a slightly strange British accent, let me say that you folk holding this hearing is what makes me proud to be an American. And I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, Congressman Moran, to thank you personally. We haven't met, but you have been immensely helpful to my military co-counsel, Lieutenant Colonel Yvonne Bradley, and I just want to thank you for doing that. Thank you, sir. A reputation is very hard to win and very often easily lost, and I do want to focus mainly here on what we can do in the future to repair the damage that we've created. But I think really what I bring to the table today is mainly the 80-odd prisoners that my office has represented down in Guantanamo Bay, where we have tried to help repair the United States Constitution, which is, Mr. Ranking Member, I think something we could teach the Europeans. The Constitution would be a very fine idea, even in my other home country, Great Britain. But let me tell you just about 3 of the prisoners who are still in Guantanamo Bay who my office represents, because this is what we need to repair right now. One is a chap called Muhammad Hussein Abdallah. He's a teacher, and he's a father of 11 people, originally a Somali refugee. He left Somalia many, many years ago to escape the early days of the conflict that we sadly know continues to this day. And the family settled in Pakistan in the early 90s, and he was recognized as a UNHCR refugee in 1993. And for the next several years, the Abdullah family lived quietly in Pakistan, minding their own business. Mr. Abdullah taught orphans at a Red Crescent school in a place called Jalazai, a refugee camp outside Peshawar, which was housing many Afghan refugees who themselves had fled from the conflict in Afghanistan. One night, Pakistani soldiers burst in, grabbed him, and he is one of the many people, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned bounties, he's one of the many people who were sold to the United States for bounty. Now look, we all recognize, everybody now recognizes that Mr. Abdullah is innocent. The United States military has recognized it, it's been conceded by everybody, and yet he's still in Guantanamo Bay. And it's been recognized for months and months, indeed flowing into years now. And the question is why? And the question is why we're not achieving something to get him out of there. And part of the problem is that the different sides are not talking. That we as the lawyers who could help immensely in finding locations that these people can be taken to, the State Department won't even talk to us. I have a member of my staff in Somaliland right now. Somaliland is recognized by our government. It's stable. My staff members talking to their government right now. They're willing to take him back. And all we want is to be able to talk to the State Department so we can get one person back. Mr. Abdullah is a granddad. He has limited years left on this planet, and it's very urgent for him that we get him out of Guantanamo Bay to spend those last years with his grandchildren and his family. Second person I want to talk about is Mohammed El Gharani, and there was mention earlier on about cigarettes being stubbed out on his arm. That happened to him, and look, I've seen it. I've seen his arm. It's pretty obvious when cigarette burns have been used, and the prisoners don't have cigarettes to do it to themselves in Guantanamo Bay. He is indeed one of the prisoners who was interviewed by the FBI, and you mentioned the report that came out today. I sat in the room while the FBI questioned him about the abuse that they saw of my client. And so it's certainly not just coming from me or from Mr. El Gharani. He was 14 years old at the time he was seized in Pakistan. He's now 21. He's still there. He's spent over 6 years in U.S. custody without any trial. He's originally from Medina in Saudi Arabia, although he's a Chad national, and he's not recognized as a Saudi Arabian national. And one of the great tragedies of the racism in Saudi Arabia is if you're not a Saudi national and you have black skin, you don't get to go to secondary school. And the reason he ended up going to Pakistan was to learn computers and learn English in Pakistan. He'd only just got there when he was snatched up, sold for a bounty, and indeed ended up in Guantanamo Bay. And he was held, when he was held by the Pakistanis, he was hung by his wrists also. And, you know, one of the sad things that I've been involved in over the last few years, just as a matter of interest, is looking to see what the Spanish Inquisition called these stress positions when they used them. And maybe hanging by your wrist doesn't sound so bad until you learn that the Spanish Inquisition called that stripado. And they did it because it dislocates your shoulders, and it is excruciatingly painful. And it's the same thing that Mr. Kanaz was talking about a little while ago. When I first got to see him in 2005, it reflects on some of the tragic mistakes we've made down there, that the military thought he was 10 years older than he actually is. And I made the delicate suggestion that perhaps we could figure it out by getting his birth certificate. It's not so difficult. And we got that from Saudi Arabia, confirming that he was born in November 1986, and he had indeed been 14 at the time he was seized in Pakistan. And, you know, the main allegation that's been made against him over all these years that remains to this day is that in 1998 he was a member of the London cell of Al-Qaeda. Well, if that's true, he was 11 years old, and he was somehow transported there by the Starship Enterprise because he'd never been out of Saudi Arabia. And I'm glad to say, actually, in one of his recent interrogations, the guy who was doing it apologized to him that he was still required to ask these silly questions about whether he was in the London cell of Al-Qaeda. This child has made repeated suicide attempts, and he's tried to slash his wrists. And, you know, he still is a kid, and we should be treating him as a child rather than as and the way he's been treated in Guantanamo Bay. He is in Camp 5 right now. I've spent 25 years representing people on death row in the Deep South, and I've been to all the prisons where people are held on down there. And I got to say, I have not seen any individual who's held under the same circumstances as Mohammed is in Guantanamo Bay today. And, you know, I invite you, long ago when they raised this red herring that you shouldn't be allowed to talk to my clients because they have Geneva Convention rights that gives them privacy, I had my clients sign waivers because I want them to talk to you, and I want them to talk to anyone who wants to go talk to them, quite frankly. And I'll give you waivers today. And I don't need to be there. You can talk to any of these three people we're talking about by yourselves. Be my guest. All I want you to do is have that opportunity.